Well, I think we'll get started. I think people are going to keep piling in, but we'll get the program going. So greetings and welcome. Thank you for joining us during our inaugural Lake Friendly Living Awareness Week. This week has been full of opportunities for individuals to better understand lake-friendly living improvement techniques for their landscapes, how to identify invasive species, and how each individual can contribute to the immense Finger Lakes efforts to protect our lakes. We are thrilled to have you here tonight for a very special webinar, Sustainable Vineyard Best Management Practices for Protecting Seneca Lake, is brought to you by the Seneca Lake Pure Waters Association in collaboration with the Lake Friendly Living Coalition of the Finger Lakes. My name is Caitlin Fellow. I'm the administrative coordinator of the Seneca Lake Pure Waters Association. So we're shifting gears tonight and we will speak with businesses, particularly local vineyard owners and managers, to discuss lake-friendly living on a larger scale. Now, the health of our lakes depend on each and every one of us to do our part, and we commend these industry leaders for leading by example. I think we're all proud of the region we reside, and that is in part due to the beautiful lakes and agricultural landscape that surrounds them. The craft beverage industry has had tremendous growth in recent years and brings tourists from near and far, boosting our economy, providing local jobs ranging from entry level to skilled and technical. Grape growing is an art, it is a science, and it is a beautiful part of the Finger Lakes region. So the Lake Friendly Living Coalition of the Finger Lakes is comprised of 7 lake organizations throughout the Finger Lakes, including Canandaigua, Keuka, Seneca, Cayuga, Owasco, Skaneateles, and Otisco. Over the last 8 months, we have learned much from collaborating with one another and will continue to work together to grow and promote lake-friendly living throughout the Finger Lakes and beyond. We'd like to thank our sponsors and supporting partners of the Lake Friendly Living Awareness Week, with a special thank you to our major sponsor, the Nature Conservancy of New York. In addition to the supporting partners listed on the screen, we'd also like to thank the Finger Lakes Wine Alliance and the Seneca Lake Wine Trail for their support of this webinar in particular. So now I'd like to introduce the presenters for this evening. First up is known as the voice of the Finger Lakes. Michael Warren Thomas has established himself as an authority on the region's restaurant, wine, agriculture, and horticulture scene. He broadcasts live from restaurants, wineries, and garden stores, and has committed over 25 years to his passion for regional wine and food. Michael will moderate the discussion tonight. Scott Osborn is a Rochester native who traveled the country and world before a love of cold climate wines drew him back to the Finger Lakes. He purchased Fox Run Vineyards in 1994 and operates the winery today with his wife and co-owner, Ruth Osborn. Over the years, Scott has been active member and leader of local and national organizations and are vital to the wine industry, such as Wine America, New York Wine Industry Alliance, and the Seneca Lake Wine Trail. John Santos is the vineyard manager for Hazlitt 1852 Vineyards, and in 2009 helped Hazlitt receive the Schuyler County Conservation Farmer of the Year Award. Sustainable and lake-friendly vineyard practices John has implemented at Hazlitt include a composting program that involves using the winery's waste, such as grape, hummus, out of the vineyards, which has greatly reduced the need for chemical fertilizers. John has also been a part of demonstrations on utilizing this compost through Cornell Cooperative Extension and help others learn ways to make vineyard management more sustainable. So without further delay, let's learn a little more about Fox Run Vineyard owner Scott Osborn with a short video, and then Michael will lead the discussion from there. Bear with me here. There we go. Y'all hearing this? Let's see. Here we go. Sorry about that.
Back in 1994, I purchased Fox Run, and at that time, one of my beliefs was I would return the land better than when I got it. And so we started practicing certain things so that we could achieve that goal. Well, one of those, we are dry farmed, so I don't do irrigation or anything like that. I established a vision at that time, and our vision is to be a passionate, profitable, sustainable, and environmentally responsible while growing high-quality grapes and making great wine and food that distinguish us and the Finger Lakes. Following that vision, I found out through Soil and Water that they had this program called Lake Friendly Farmer, and we went through the workbook. We finished it, and in 2002 we were designated a Lake Friendly Farmer. One of the interesting things that I think is very few people know about, and that is almost every winery that has vineyards on Seneca Lake has a Lake Friendly Farmer designation. So that shows you that our industry is working very hard to be environmentally responsible. We began planting ryegrass in between the rows so that we could, have some deep-rooted grasses that would loosen up the soil for us. In 2015, we installed a solar array, and we are now 100% of our electrical usage is from solar power. We also began in 2018 spraying Mycorrhizal. And for those of you who don't understand what Mycorrhizal is a fungus that grows on all roots. And by stimulating that growth with multiple strains of Mycorrhizal, a root system can expand to almost 700 times what it would naturally be growing. And what that does is it expands the area for nutrition. Water is the natural flow of nutrition, so it also helps bring in more water to the plant. So in drought situations, we have seen no drought stress as we have many years in the past. In 2021, we purchased a glass crusher. And then this is what it ends up with. So those are the labels, this stuff here, which is just paper. And also our next project for 2021 is to establish a bee and monarch sanctuary. This is funded by the federal NRCS. We are going to devote 4.5 acres to this. It's part of my belief that every farmer should devote a portion of their land to help improve the environment.
Okay, take it away, Michael.
All right. My name is Michael Warren Thomas, and I'm been broadcasting in the Finger Lakes out of Rochester for a couple of decades. Sort of ironically, strange. Scott purchased Fox Run in 1994. John Santos started at Hazlitt in 1994, and I launched my first gardening radio show in 1994. Kind of odd timing. But Scott, the video, we saw a lot of different ways in which you're innovating. But the Finger Lakes is known for collaboration, and behind the scenes, things are going on with other wineries, collaborations, discussions. So give us some background on what it wasn't covered in the video, maybe that's happening at Fox Run and in the Finger Lakes.
Well, we just finished planting the bee habitat, which is kind of neat. The collaboration, there's a group of wineries that are working on sustainability, and they have discussions, I think monthly, on all these topics. I think John's a part of that. You know, the industry is real concerned about where we are and where we live, and we know that the lake is, and the lakes are important to our business. You know, just from growing grapes and being able to grow the grapes that we can here because of the impact that the lakes themselves do in terms of the weather.
So what kinds of farming practices, things are you doing that are intended not only to grow better grapes, but also to avoid erosion, to improve the environment?
Most of our vines are planted north and south, so they're basically horizontal to the lake. And you know, we did plant one vineyard east and west, and which basically goes down the slope, and we discovered that's not a good idea because basically it channels the water right down to the lake, and that's not good. Where you're planted north and south, you know, any kind of heavy rains and stuff are usually stopped by all the rows. So that's really important. We are using, instead of using herbicides, we use a piece of equipment called a brawn that actually slices the roots of weeds. So we don't have to use an herbicide. It slices the root, tips the weed over, and basically kills it. And then towards the end of the year, end of the season, we'll weed whack, you know, and weed whack any kind of weed growth that we have. We also hoe around the vines to take, sometimes you can't really get into the vines with a weed whacker or with a brawn, so we go through with a hoe and hand hoe the weeds out from around the vines. And
well, how many acres do you have? Because that's a lot of acreage to manage.
Yeah, we have 50 acres of grapes, and it's a challenge. You know, you know, nowadays it's kind of hard to get help, but fortunately we have some full-time people, and we're able to survive it. But I know some of my neighbors are having challenges getting help to, you know, to work in their vineyards.
One of the big concerns for the lake is phosphorus, fertilization, and I think a lot of people live along the lake, and ordinary non-agricultural people maybe assume that vineyards fertilize like lawns or like you know, farms of corn and soybeans. And what's different about vineyards and how you use fertilizer?
Well, we don't use any fertilizers, basically. You know, for instance, nitrogen is something that everybody talks about. Well, nitrogen makes your weeds grow, it makes your vines grow too much. And, you know, we test our soils constantly to make sure there is enough nutrition. We use, we take round bales and roll them out in between the rows, you know, for organic material, to reintroduce it. And then it goes back to the mycorrhizae. You know, the mycorrhizae are able to source nutrition from a much wider area. And you know, basically, to me, the vine is healthier. You know, a healthier vine means that it's going to ward off, hopefully ward off disease better, you know, which means that we hopefully can reduce sprays.
You were telling me a little while ago that these things all interact with each other. So, you know, for example, if if you're using herbicides, that would affect the pollinators. If you're using the brawn, the cutter for the weeds, you might be interacting with the mycorrhizae. And so it's kind of a constant learning process, right?
Yeah, and you know what we found is the brawn cuts above the root level, so it doesn't really interact with the mycorrhizae as much. At least that's our thinking. You know, only having been doing this for 3 or 4 years. You know, and then obviously herbicides are going to affect any kind of insects that happen to be on the weeds at the time, so you can kill those little puppies, which is not necessarily a good thing. You know, oh God, I'm having a brain dump. A lot of times we like to cut along. We like to cut along where the tractor tires are, so we can rip the soil to break up the compaction that's going on, and we're looking at that now instead of we used to do it once every we do every other row once a year, and we're going to get away from that and maybe do it once every 4 years, just because we don't want to have to damage the mycorrhizae as much.
So you're not going to get any horses in there?
Not yet.
And lastly, you know, in terms of sustainability, you told me earlier that it was kind of overwhelming thinking about how many things you could do and want to do. How have you approached that at Fox Run?
Well, you know, initially with meetings with my staff, you know, we discussed this on a pretty regular basis, and it was, you know, to all of a sudden just do everything at once was overwhelming to me. And you know, we're a small business, we're limited resources. So what I chose to do was approach each one of my managers and say, okay, every year we want to find one thing that we can do, one process that we can change to become more sustainable. And it's much easier to attain a goal this way we attain goals every year. It also keeps my staff thinking about sustainability and their role within the greater good, so to speak, in terms of both the winery, the Finger Lakes, and the environment as a whole.
And you know, for the winery, for the future of Fox Run, how important is Seneca Lake?
Well, it's really important. I mean, that's what allows us to grow these grapes here, and you know, and some of the tender varieties that wouldn't normally grow, you know, in other areas, we can grow here, and you know, a lot of those grapes, we're able to make really expensive wines and high quality, and you know, and what it comes down to, we're a business, you know, and we have to pay salaries, and we have to do all those things, and you know, if we can't make really good wine from really good grapes, then we're not going to survive.
And back before Prohibition, even back in the 50s and 60s, when Taylor and others were buying lots of grapes, there were far more vineyards on Seneca Lake, weren't there? We're not near.
Before Prohibition, I know there were a lot. There were a bunch of wineries on the lake, and after Prohibition, you know, all those wineries closed until the Farm Winery Act, and I think Glenora and Wagner were two of the first wineries to open up on Seneca Lake.
So, in some ways, it seems like for some people, the Finger Lakes has lots of wineries, lots of grapes, but there's still a lot of potential growth for the region. It seems like we're still a very young region, aren't we?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, if you think about the Napa Valley, it's about the same size as the Seneca Lake area, and there's a 1,000 wineries in the Napa Valley right now, and you know, so there's lots of room for growth. There's still a lot of land left to plant vineyards, you know, and we can make some really dynamite wines.
So, last question: how many views on your bottle crushing video so far?
That's one of the most surprising things ever. I think last we looked at there were 2.7 million views.
Yeah. Well, it's a cool idea,
and it's all over the world.
Yeah.
I have been getting emails from France and Belgium and places like that of people asking about it.
Yeah,
it's incredible.
Well, again, just another one of the innovations. So thank you, Scott. We're going to do a Q&A after the
sure
video and a discussion with John Santos from Hazlitt, 1852.
Yeah, John's doing some great stuff.
So let's switch over and we'll have a short video about John Santos.
Compost
That was a very short video about John, but it's it's coming up.
Compost is very beneficial in a lot of ways. And we use the compost that we produce from our waste that we generate at the winery to fertilize our vineyards. And we do this in a sustainable manner by replacing the nutrients lost with the crop back into the vineyard with the compost. Beneficial bacteria and fungi that help to control diseases, improve soil structure. It's about improving the organic matter content of the soil and sequestering carbon in the soil. It improves soil water infiltration rates and water holding capacity. So less of the water that falls on the soil runs off at the surface or leaches through the soil horizon and makes it to the groundwater. And these things help keep the soil in place when water is not running off and help keep the nutrients and pesticides from finding their way to the lake. Paul Brock of Silver Thread Winery, he started a biological working group. So what is the biological working group? It's farmers that are attempting to, if not eliminate, at least substitute some petrochemical pesticides, fungicides in particular, with biological agents to control disease. And there are many farmers within the group, Herman Weimer Vineyards, Wagner, Lamoureux Landing, Forge Cellars, Dan Yanni, and all of these people, we did meet once a month before the pandemic. We all discussed what we were doing on our farm. We would occasionally have a speaker talk about a certain topic. And there was always a sharing of knowledge of what worked and what didn't work, and helping other farmers within the group advance to using more biologicals and applying less pesticides in the vineyard.
All right, that was John Santos, who's with us for the webinar, and again, has been at Hazlitt 1852 since 1994. And John, you alluded to the biological controls and some of the changes that have been made. maybe you can give us a sense for a couple of those that you're using, and so a couple of examples.
Okay, well, there's a woman who started a company, Marone Bio Ag, I believe is the name of the company, and they produce several biologicals where they're identifying bacteria in nature that suppress fungal pathogens. They can even suppress bacterial pathogens as well. And they are finding these organisms and then producing a pure strain of a bacillus, usually, that you can apply to the vineyard that will control things like powdery mildew, botrytis bunch rot, and that helps us reduce the fungicides that we're using. It also helps us in not having the fungicides that we do use lose their efficacy over time. The fungi will evolve resistance to the fungicides that we're applying, and then we'll lose control over powdery mildew. So if you have other options that you can throw in there, it prevents resistance buildup from occurring.
Yeah, I think you mentioned to me earlier that the bacteria actually eat not so much the fungi, but they consume what the fungi would go after, which limits. It's kind of indirect in a sense.
Yeah, some of the bacteria and even some yeast organisms which have been identified will colonize the surface of the grapes and the phyllosphere, the leaves on the vine, and they basically prevent the pathogens from gaining a foothold on the surface of the leaf or the fruit, and therefore infecting. So they don't cause any harm, but they do grow on the surface of the berry, on the surface of the leaf. They will colonize it.
And in turn, we talked a little bit with Scott about fertilizing. In terms of maintenance of the vineyards, are you using only compost, really, and maybe some micronutrients when you fertilize, or do you use standard fertilizers?
We do not use any ground applied chemical fertilizers. We haven't since the early 2000s, late 1990s. What we do is we do soil sampling, and we look at, are there any nutrients like potassium that are deficient? And then we look at the yield, the crop yield that came off the vineyard. So if we harvested 3 tons to the acre and there's no potassium deficiency in the soil, we might apply 3 yards of compost to the acre to replace the potassium that was lost from the vineyard with the fruit at harvest. And so generally speaking, our application rates have been 3 to 6 yards to the acre in the past. And a yard of our compost is about half a ton. It's a little more than half a ton. So you're talking 1.5 to 3 ton of compost to the acre. So it's a very small amount that you need to actually address those nutrients that are lost with the crop. 10 ton to the acre application evenly spread over the land would be the depth of a dime lying flat on the surface. Right. So when you're talking 1.5 to 3 tons, that's hardly visible. In the video you were seeing where we used it to actually mound up around the grafts to bury the grafts for winter protection in the vineyards. And that's a new strategy that we're moving toward rather than just broadcasting.
So for most agriculture, farming in general, people are trying to grow as much of a crop, as big a crop as they can. But it's actually very different with grapes, right? You're not necessarily trying to grow the biggest crop, the most leaves, the biggest grapes.
Definitely not the most leaves. As Scott was talking about, you can induce excessive vigor with fertilization and grow too many leaves, and that will reduce the quality of the fruit. So a PhD candidate, Justin Jack Shiner, did a study on Cabernet Franc, looking at the green flavors in the fruit, and found that it was directly related to the amount of growth that the vine put on mid-July through when it ceased growing at the end of the season, that determined how much of these chemicals were in the fruit. And the more the vine grew in that later summer period, the higher the concentration of those chemicals was. And so you reach a point in the season where you want the vine to stop growing and to ripen the fruit, and that's how you get really quality fruit. And what we try to achieve is about 5 pounds of fruit for every pound of grape prunings in the vineyard. And we measure that by taking sentinel vines within the block and measuring the pruning weight in the winter. And then during the season, when we're doing crop estimating, we're calculating from last year's pruning weight, estimating what the current year's pruning weight would be, and measuring that against the fruit that we have on the vine. And then we can decide, do we need to remove any fruit, or are we balanced? And for the most part, we don't need to remove fruit unless we have really short shoots within the vineyard. The short shoots won't have enough photosynthetic surface area to ripen their crop. So you can have too small a vine, you can have too big a vine. You're trying to achieve a balance.
And you've been at Hazlitt since 1994. How have things changed in terms of thinking about the lake and sustainability and those kinds of practices in the vineyard work over these years?
Well, there's been a lot of information coming out from Cornell University. Justine has been working on under the trellis cover crops and showing that having something growing underneath the trellis reduces the amount of chemicals and nitrogen that make it to the groundwater. So there's information like that keeps coming out. You know, when I first started, we were applying in Concord vineyards like 100 pounds of nitrogen to the acre annually. Now that was the total weight of the fertilizer, so the actual N was lower than that. But we quickly identified that was unnecessary, especially as we got rid of the natives and went to vinifera, and we went down to about 25 pounds to the acre of actual N before when we just stopped applying chemical fertilizers altogether and just used the compost to create our soil fertility.
And one of the slides right now is the grape pumice. That's what's left over after you press the grapes, and that's where your compost mainly comes from?
Yeah, it's about 50% pumice and 50% bedded horse manure, with some yard waste added in. So there, it's not 50-50 with the yard waste in there, but there's some wood chips added. The wood chips are mainly added to create a fluffier, more light, airy pile, so that there's channels for the air to move throughout the pile.
Well, everyone should have a compost pile of some kind if they can. We send far too much waste, lawn, garden, etc., to landfills when we can recycle it, and obviously it's become a bigger part at Hazlitt. So, John, thank you. We're going to take some questions, I think, for both Scott and John, and people can put those in the chat. There's a couple of them that were posted from Morris. So maybe, John, you can start with this. What's your perspective on the future of grape growing in the Finger Lakes? Where do we stand now? Where do you see us going in the future?
Well, I would have said 5 years ago that the future was more and more mechanization. I still think that is going to play a role as the labor market gets tighter and tighter, that people will be mechanizing certain operations more and more. I myself have found that mechanizing pruning presents some problems in terms of some fungal pathogens that infect through pruning wounds, and the mechanized pruning leaves kind of ugly wounds as opposed to really nice sharp hand shears. and those wounds are, I think, more prone to fungal pathogens, as are the cordons that you have to maintain in order to be able to do mechanized pruning. A lot of the vineyards are pruned to canes rather than cordons, which cordons are semi-permanent arms with little spurs that provide the buds for the year, versus a cane where the buds are all along the length of the cane. And having all that old wood within the vineyard increases inoculum for fungal pathogens as well. So I've backed off on the mechanized pruning, and I'm in the process of retraining a lot of vineyards.
All right. And Scott, how long have the mycorrhizal fungi been used? And I've seen them in landscape, ornamental landscape use, transplanting trees and shrubs, but I hadn't heard about them being used in vineyards. How are the relationships between the fungi and grapes? How do you monitor that?
Well, there's been a lot of work done in New Zealand with it, and we heard about it probably. I think I heard about it in 2017 or 16, right around there, and tried a couple of test rows on it. Saw some results in terms of lack of drought stress in the drought, and talked to Justine Vanderhoover, who is doing research at Cornell, and so she has been coming by, and she will dig down into the roots to see how much mycorrhizae is there. We're trying to figure out things like, do you have to spray it every year? What kind of disturbance can knock it back, so to speak? Or if we don't have to spray for a couple of years, what we're still looking into that. One of the things that she and I've talked about lately is trying to get some work done on cold hardiness to see if mycorrhizal vines, or vines that have mycorrhizae on them, or in the root system, are more cold hardy than vines that haven't had that sprayed down in the root system. So we have a couple of blocks of rows that have not been sprayed with mycorrhizae, and we're going to be doing those tests.
Leonard asks, how does pulverizing your bottles improve the environment differently than recycling your bottles?
Well, that's a very good question. It's a question that that I asked myself a number of times. But what I found out, people who are my age will remember they used to have to recycle by color. So you would have your clear bin and your colored, your green bin, and you separate your glass by color. They don't do that anymore. And but it turns out that as soon as you break a bottle in a bunch of other bottles, then it contaminates the whole load, and so they can't separate it, so it ends up in landfill. So we have been. That's one of the reasons I bought it, is to try to reduce the amount of glass that I was putting in a landfill. And
we'll see it as decoration at the out in the tasting area.
We're gonna. It's amazing. You can use it for just about anything, because you can't get cut, so you can pour it in your driveway. We're gonna use it as a base for our picnic tables. I'm gonna, if I can ever get enough blue glass crushed, I'm gonna use it in my handicap parking area, so it'll be blue. You'll know where it is.
John, what are some of the challenges associated with climate change, potentially warmer lake temperatures? What are you facing in the vineyards at Hazlitt?
Well, everybody in the industry remembers 2018, which was a warm, wet fall. And that warm, wet fall was a headache for all of us in terms of botrytis bunch rot and sour rot, these things that can take out the crop that you've been growing all season long, a week before you're going to pick it. And as we get warmer fall weather and wetter, the most recent climate analysis that came out is saying that the east is definitely getting wetter, and as that occurs, that it makes it harder and harder to control fungal pathogens. So I would say that's probably the biggest one, is just the fungal pathogens with all the water and the outrageously heavy rainfall events, like the one that happened in Hector a few years ago that dropped 9 inches in less than 24 hours. And it happened over in Penn Yan a couple of years before that. These, what they call 100-year storms, which are happening every couple of years somewhere.
Yeah.
How about you, Scott? How do you see the lake temperatures and the climate change affecting what you do at Fox Run?
Well, when I first came here, it was really rare to see bud break before May 15th. And, it seemed like about 10 years ago that as the lake is warming up, we're starting to see earlier and earlier bud break, which then leaves us sleepless nights, because there's going to we can get this cold temperature come roaring down through, and, it can devastate all of us. A bud can have anywhere from 1 to 3 clusters of grapes, but when you kill it, the secondary bud that comes up a couple of weeks later is either going to be 0 or blend cluster. So you can lose a huge amount of your production by having a frost. And so that we started to see earlier bud break and warmer lake temperatures in the winter.
And in general, I think, staying with you, Scott, Pat's asking about collaborations with other colleges to target sustainability in the vineyards. Are there area colleges that are partnering or collaborating in the Finger Lakes?
I haven't done anything at this point, but RIT I know has a big sustainable program that, and they do a lot of research up there, and that's. I think Hobart Williams Smith is doing some stuff, but I don't really know for sure.
And then also, Scott, how about the FLCC and Cornell in terms of the education they're providing for vineyard managers, for assistant winemakers, sort of the future, part of the future of the region? How important is that?
Well, that's very important to, and we need vineyard managers, like John. I mean, we need more and more of those, and there's not a lot of them out there. And FLCC is doing a great job in teaching, these people who seem to want to get into that. And Cornell's doing a great job. Some of the top winemakers in the country have come out of Cornell. Nova Calamarde is one of those. That,
John, do you see? Do you have enough people with the right kind of training to work in the vineyard? Or is there a shortage of those people, or what's the status of that?
There's definitely a shortage of those people. It's been dividing into two categories, basically. There's the tractor drivers, who are the locals, and then mostly migrant labor doing a lot of the handwork. And so there's a lack of skilled people doing the handwork, especially locally. And then it's harder and harder to find people to do the tractor driving as well. I also find, talking about the training of people through schools, that I've hosted Cornell classes out at Hazlitt's, and it seems like a lot of the people they're in viticulture and enology at Cornell, but they really want to be an enologist. They want to be the winemaker. They don't want to be the vineyard manager. So there's a lot more winemakers coming out of the program than there are viticulturalists. But a lot of the younger people that are doing the vineyard management are people that have risen through the ranks, that started working in a vineyard and have been trained on the job rather than in a school, it seems.
And John, what percentage? Caitlin's asked, what percentage of Seneca Lake vineyards would you estimate are taking steps towards implementing sustainable practices to protect the lake? Given obviously some are part of the biological group that meets, but in general, what would you say?
I wouldn't really want to venture a guess myself. I know, the workbook that was put out years ago, it started out as a sustainability program that became Vine Balance. and I know a lot of farmers went through that, and you'll see lake-friendly farmer plaques all up and down the lake, where people have gone through the workbook and are moving in a more sustainable manner towards their farming. But I wouldn't want to venture a guess as percentage myself.
That's all right. And one more question, John. Someone's asking about, can you expand on soil conservation techniques and how they differ from 100% clean cultivation that used to be the norm decades ago?
Yeah, I don't think anybody does clean cultivation. People only cultivate pretty much underneath the trellis.
What does clean cultivation mean?
Oh, that would be bare soil throughout. That would be even where the tractor drives, you know, going for absolute clean cultivation versus having some kind of an herbicide strip or cultivation underneath the trellis, where that's the only place that you're controlling vegetative growth. So, and you know, people can suppress some of the growth in between the rows where they're not cultivating with things like rolling out hay, if the hay is rolling out deep enough. And there are a lot of farmers that roll out hay in vineyards to add organic matter, to decrease the impact of rainwater on the soil. And, you know, over time it improves the soil structure, water infiltration rates, very similar effects as putting compost on.
So, and John, someone asked about, they have a small vineyard, they have limited capital. Are there under the vine practices that are proven by larger institutions like Cornell that we might consider and are competitive cost-wise to applying herbicides? So how would you compare the costs of sort of traditional herbicides maybe versus what you do?
Well, if you're really trying to control the weeds underneath the trellis and have it, you know, bare, you need to run a hoe underneath the trellis as much as 4 times in a season to really achieve that. But as Scott was saying, that's not necessarily necessary. You know, he's allowing some weed growth later in the season and then controlling it by some form of mowing. And there's more vineyards going to mowing underneath the trellis, at least for part of the season. And that would definitely be cheaper, because you can if you have the right equipment, you can drive faster mowing underneath the trellis than you can hoeing a lot of times. And again, that depends on the equipment. Some people have, you know, their Braun hoes, like Scott was talking about, that you can drive pretty rapidly, that have sensors that make their way around the vine. But if you're using something where you have to guide it around the vine yourself, it's a very slow operation, so very labor intensive. But you know, herbicides are expensive too, and herbicides like pre-emergence are made to persist in the environment, and so that there are a lot of them that just aren't allowed at all on Long Island because of the very sandy soil they have and the fact that the groundwater is their water supply, and they don't want pre-emergent herbicides getting into the groundwater and then affecting their drinking water. So,
yeah.
And they've also found there are a lot of weeds out there that you know, there may be one weed that's resistant to an herbicide, and so it survives, and then it seeds, and now you have 100 weeds that are resistant, and then it seeds again, and you got 10,000. So they found some stuff that from doing DNA tests from the 1800s that are resistant to some of the current herbicides, and they didn't even exist back then. So it's using chemical stuff, herbicides or whatever, you just use it for a while, and then it's no good anymore. You have to switch to another one. So as John says, it's expensive.
And someone also asked about invasive species. Are either of you concerned about them in the region? And I'll just throw out there that I'm scared to death of the spotted lanternfly.
Yeah.
But we all are.
I think, yeah.
Just watch some videos from Pennsylvania, and it will scare you. People need to go and you can find lots of information online about it, but we need to identify it. Anyone walking down the street in a city, in a town, in a vineyard, and it seems like both of you are very aware of it also.
Oh,
yeah. Yeah, I don't think there's anybody in the industry that's not concerned about that one. They were raising red flags about the spotted wing Drosophila years ago, and that one really hasn't been much of a problem in grapes. It is in blueberries and raspberries, the small fruited crops. I know some organic blueberry growers that basically they start the season picking blueberries, and when they get to a certain rate of that Drosophila being in the blueberry patch, they're done. They just can't control it. Because their generations are so fast. Any insecticide, they're gonna quickly evolve a pathway around, because there's so many generations within a time period that they're going to develop resistance. So, but again, that one hasn't been a problem in vineyards. We have problems with Drosophila, but not that foreign one.
All right, and obviously there's invasive species in the lake that we need to be worried about, and there's plenty of those around. But the spotted lanternfly is the one, and they've taken down 50 trees in Ithaca because they found egg masses, and they can lay these eggs up like 60 feet up in a tree. So that's why they're taking the trees down, because they can't go up and get those egg masses. But it's, as I've learned about insects and weeds, and you end up with a great respect for them in a sense, don't you, Scott? For just, you work with Mother Nature every day, and they're pretty amazingly adaptable.
Very resilient, that's for sure. Oh yeah, no, it's Mother Nature is a fascinating woman. It's every day there's something new out there, whether it's a bug or it's a weed or it's a grapevine or whatever. It's just a fascinating process to be able to watch.
Yeah. So please look up spotted lanternfly and keep your eyes open for it. The juveniles will hatch soon, the adults this summer, and it's very distinctive. So thank you.
I just want to answer one question which I saw pop up there about the glass crusher and taking other people's glass in. My glass crusher is a single bottle glass crusher, and I can't take other people's glass because all I would do every day would be to crush bottles of glass, and I just can't do it.
Good. I'm glad you mentioned that, so you don't get deliveries of empty glass bottles starting tomorrow.
I don't need them. I don't have the time. I mean, it takes to do like 20 cases of wine takes about an hour. 20 cases of glass. So.
All right, that's fair.